being spared by David and David showing himself to have wonderful character, etc. And this incident plops right in the middle of those two chapters. Now, we don't know for sure if everything in 1 Samuel is written chronologically, but it kind of feels like this is written chronologically. We'll talk about that more at the end as we get in there. But what we're going to think about is the whole issue of what does it mean to love your neighbor as yourself. And here's a Bible for you, June. Got it? What does it mean to love your neighbor as yourself? And so an introductory question at the top there is, if you asked a variety of people what it means to love your neighbor as yourself, what do you think you'd get back for answers? And I'll give you about a minute and just think that over and jot down some thoughts. What do you think the answers might be that you might get to that question? What does it mean to love your neighbor as yourself? All right, let's hear 2, 3 thoughts. Those different ideas that came to your mind. What does it mean to love our neighbor as ourselves? What do you think? Chris, get us started.
I scratch your back, you scratch mine, kind of just give and take.
Okay, so a give and take thing. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Jordan, Pastor Ertl. Sorry.
No, that's right. Probably just maybe what's the basic golden rule?
Golden rule. Treat people the way you want to be treated would be something you would hear, I think, pretty regularly. The left side has done well. Right side, get in. Gina.
Be concerned with others' welfare, not just your own.
Be concerned with others' welfare, not just your own. Nice thought. Risa, is that a hand going up?
Sure. Put
Okay.
yourself in other people's shoes.
Put yourself in other people's shoes. Nice. Mike.
I would say treat people better than you treat yourself.
Treat people better than you treat yourself. Excellent. We're going to look at we're going to think about this chapter, David and Abigail and Nabal, through that lens of what does it mean to love our neighbor as ourselves, with the hope that perhaps we can come out better equipped with an understanding of what it does mean to love our neighbor as ourselves. But Kevin would like the floor for a moment.
I think another idea of what people might respond if they are not familiar with the Bible would be the whole idea that you hear so much today that you can only love others as much as you love yourself. You got to love yourself first. Because if you don't love yourself, you're not going to be able to love others, which makes sense from a non-biblical point of view. It makes a lot of sense that your love for others is capped by your self-love, but we're missing the most important love there.
Yeah, I thank you for bringing that out. I was hoping that would come out, and that's why I purposely worded it not what does it mean to love others as ourselves, but what do you think people would say that it means to love others as yourself? And yes, one of the definitions that's out there in the world is that this has to be defined by how much you love yourself. What if you don't love yourself very much? Does that mean that it's okay for you to not love others? Make sense? And so to just realize that that's one of the thought processes that's out there in our culture is, I think, important for us to understand as we think this through, because that's also going to impact the way we do think it through and the way we do carry it out, okay? So let's go ahead and pop into 1 Samuel chapter 25. 1 Samuel 25, and we'll start by reading the first 17 verses. Now Samuel died We don't know exactly when. It seems as if Samuel died about 3 or 4 years before Saul died. So there seems to be a little space of time between the death of Samuel and the death of Saul. But it doesn't seem to be a whole lot of time. We think that Samuel lived to be about 98. So he was a long-lived guy and had impact on the Israelite nation for many, many, many years. That is for sure. They buried him at his home in Ramah. Then David moved down to the desert of Maon. A certain man in Maon who had property there at Carmel was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep. That, by the way, is an astounding amount of wealth, okay? And we read past that pretty quickly and probably don't think that much about it. But to have that many animals is an astounding amount of animals. This guy was really, really wealthy, okay? So it's just important to put that in the back of your mind as we're thinking about this segment. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. Nabal is a Hebrew word that means fool. And so obviously, you kind of look at that name and you go, really? What mom or dad would name their kid Fool? That seems like an unusual name. There is an alternate suggestion. The Hebrew word for wineskins is navali. And so there's some question as to whether this word is somehow connected to wineskins, which you'll find out as we read deeper into the account. Nabal seems to be enamored of his wine. So maybe that comes into play. Jake, I saw your hand come up.
My brain was like the same one that would name their son Dog.
That would name their son what?
Dog.
Dog?
Like Caleb. Caleb means dog.
Oh, yeah, Kalev. Yeah. Although Kalev can also mean all heart, depending on how you translate that and how you put it together. So it is interesting, though, and to try to figure out what this all means, and it is going to come up. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman, but her husband, a Calebite, was surly and mean in his dealings. Stop. Who remembers who Caleb was? Jake had just brought him up. Who was Caleb? He was one of the spies. Which one of the spies? Yes, he was one of the two, along with, anybody remember? Joshua. Excellent. Joshua and Caleb were the two spies who came back and said, yeah, we can defeat these guys. Come on, this is the land the Lord promised us. Let's go get it. What are we waiting for? And so Caleb is an Israelite hero. And I think it's interesting to notice that this guy is a descendant of an Israelite hero, okay? It's just valuable for us to take notice of that. While David was in the desert, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So he sent 10 young men and said to them, go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him in my name. Say to him, long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that's yours. Now I hear it's sheep shearing time. That was a time of celebration, by the way. When your shepherds were with us, we did not mistreat them, and the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing. Ask your own servants, and they'll tell you. Therefore be favorable toward my young men, since we come at a festive time. Please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them. Do you notice how David refers to himself as your son? What's David's thought process in referring to himself as your son? What might be David's thought process? Obviously, we're having to read his mind a bit, but what might have been David's thought process in doing it that way? Chris?
Then David might be more willing to act as a father to provide for him, but it's also like I'm your servant. I'm underneath here, being humble.
Yeah, there's a humility aspect to this. Was your hand up?
Yeah, I was thinking that if he's his son, then he might want his inheritance, or he might be implying that he'd like his inheritance, or
That Nabal might be more willing to share stuff with them? Yeah, absolutely. I think so. And there's definitely a humility aspect to this in referring to himself as your son. He doesn't refer to himself as your future king. He refers to himself as your son. Interesting. Okay, Okay, I lost my spot. Where are we? Verse 9. Okay. When David's men arrived, they gave Nabal this message in David's name. Then they waited. Nabal answered David's servants, "Who is this David, and who is this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why should I take my bread and water and the meat I have slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men coming from who knows where?" When David's men turned around, David's men turned around and went back. When they arrived, they reported every word. David said to his men, "Put on your swords." So they put on their swords, and David put on his. About 400 men went up with David, while 200 stayed with the supplies. One of the servants told Nabal's wife Abigail, "David sent messengers from the desert to give our master his greetings, but he hurled insults at them. Yet these men were very good to us. They did not mistreat us, and the whole time we were out in the fields near them, nothing was missing. Night and day they were a wall around us all the time we were herding our sheep near them. Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him." Let's stop there and take a look at the study guide. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to fill in the two questions that are there. I don't think it'll take incredibly long time, but go ahead and fill in the two questions that are there, and then we'll talk about it. Good morning, Damien. Do you need the Bible? Good. We are right there. Number 1. Yep, those two. Yep. All right, let's go ahead and come together again. Before we do, I want to do just a little bit of map work. This incident is being described as taking place near Carmel in the desert of Maon. The Hebrew says the desert of Perann. The Septuagint translates it as Maon. And you notice on your map, towards the bottom of the Dead Sea, you see En-Gedi there at the bottom. That's probably where the events of the last week's study took place. And just to the left there is Carmel with Ziph and Maon. They're close. It would seem likely that that's about where this takes place. However, there are some question marks. Some would put the Desert of Perann significantly to the south and west. So if you see where it says Edomites, almost down at the very bottom of your map there, go a little bit further to the left and probably a little bit further south besides, and that would be the Desert of Perann. Is it possible that this could have taken place there? It is. That area starts to get pretty dry. So could a guy have taken care of as many animals as Nabal had down there? Maybe. Of course, you also don't know if maybe that area got more water back in those days. If that area got a little bit more water, it would have been very, very lush. When they can get water to those desert regions, it just pops. It's amazing how it just blossoms. The other issue is the whole identification of where Carmel is. The reason you know Mount Carmel is from Elijah and the prophets of Baal. Elijah and the prophets of Baal event took place on Mount Carmel, and that's way further north. If you see where Manasseh is, the left one, let's pick out Jezreel. You see where Jezreel is, almost up here to the Sea of Galilee? Go down and to your left, and that's half of the tribe of Manasseh. Mount Carmel would be about where the M in Manasseh is, maybe just a touch south of there, but it wouldn't be much. It's right around there is where Mount Carmel is. So there's some question mark as to where this takes place. I would suggest the map probably has it accurate, so just an FYI. But if you've got your own Bible and are taking notes, you may want to take a note that there is some question mark as to exactly where this takes place. So let's talk about first of all, Nabal. What did you all learn about Nabal from this segment? There's a variety of things we should point out. What did you all learn about him? Jake, get us started.
Given the adjectives that they use for the way he deals with people in his business, it sounds like a jerk. He uses words like harsh, hard, evil, wicked.
Surly, mean, hard, harsh, wicked. Yeah. So this guy does not sound like a nice guy. What else?
Very easily, because of the fact that he asked about the servants do they leave David or,
Yeah, and I think we should explore that. Many servants are breaking away. I think we should explore that a little further. I love that you pointed that out. Go ahead, Mike.
I think he's short-sighted because he obviously has to know who David is, especially since his servants were protected by him. So this is a man with an army, very short-sighted to make him angry.
I think you pulled out a couple of interesting details there. He knows who David is because he doesn't just reference him as David, but he references him as the son of Jesse. So he knows who David is, and he knows what David has done, that he has broken away from Saul. So there's an understanding here of who David is, at least to some extent. Who did I see over here? Was it Chris?
He knows that Saul and David had a relationship, and now he's breaking away, but he's using it. He's not blaming Saul, he's blaming David, saying, hey, you're the one that's breaking away from your master, so I don't like you.
Yeah, so he seems to be blaming David on this, that David has broken away from the master and should not have. And you can put yourself into Nabal's shoes. For what reasons would it make some sense that he would approach it that way? Saul's king, so maybe he's on Saul's side. Joyce?
Well, he didn't want to give them anything. He knew what they were after, but he didn't want to give up any bread or meat or water or supplies.
So good. You kind of have taken us in another direction. He seems to be kind of a selfish guy, from what you can see here. I think I saw Jake, and then
He's wealthy, so he's going to side with whoever's going to provide the surest source of stability, and David and his band of rebels are going to cause destruction, and the people who are going to pay for that are the people who own property and goods, because their things are going to get destroyed in the crossfire. So he's going to back the king because he doesn't want any of that noise in his land.
I think that's a reasonable guess at this. Good. Megan?
Maybe this is a bad point, but is he saying that about the servants to David because he doesn't want all of his that are underneath him because he's rich to be like, oh, they rebelled and look at, they're doing okay. We can do the same to you who treats us poorly because David was treated poorly and we can
I think that's not only not a bad point, I think it's a really, really salient point. I think absolutely. Nabal's a guy who has many servants, or you get the impression he does. And so if his servants get the idea that a servant can break away from their master, he's going to have huge problems. And so as he looks at this to say, okay, I should encourage this David who has broken away from his master, why would I do that? So you can kind of see the strategy that's going on here in Nabal's mind as to why he's doing what he is doing. Kevin.
This also falls in between our accounts from last time when you talked about the rumors and propaganda being spread about David. Who knows what he's heard?
Very, very good point. Who knows what he's heard? And by the way, did you notice what city was just north of Carmel on the map? Ziph. And do you remember why that was important? Say again?
They were the ones always telling Saul where David.
Yes. The Ziphites were the ones who were always connecting with Saul and telling Saul where David was. And so did Nabal feel himself in a pressure place that if he helps David out, that the neighboring town is going to turn against him? Yeah, maybe so. Maybe so. Let's explore the wealth aspect. How many stupid people do you know that get really wealthy? It doesn't usually happen, does it? I mean, there are rare occurrences, I suppose, but in general, people who get really wealthy, finish my sentence, they've got something going on upstairs, don't they? And so the fact that he has herds and wealth and servants would not lead us to say this guy's an idiot. It might lead us to say he's a bit of a jerk in regards to the way he interacts with people. That's for sure, because the scripture tells us that. But he probably is not an idiot. He's probably a pretty sharp dude, because he probably would not have gotten as wealthy as he was if he was not a pretty sharp guy. Make sense? And so I think it's important that we recognize that, because I think sometimes Nabal gets a little bit typecast or caricaturized because of his name and because of some of the things that the Bible does tell us about him. I think we need to back up and say this is a guy who probably was pretty sharp, who probably knew what he was doing in a whole lot of ways. Make sense? Make sense? I think there's value in seeing that. David's men come back and report Nabal's response to David. Broaden this question a little bit. What do you all learn about David from these verses so far? Not just his response, but what do you learn about David from these verses? I should have broadened this question. I apologize for making it too narrow. Go ahead, Sue.
A couple of different things. I thought first is he's peaceful, and then he can be vengeful because he went after him.
Yeah, let's bust him in half. And first, talk about the peaceful thing first. You said he's peaceful. Why'd you say that?
Well, because he was trying to go to Nabal and in peace, talking to him and asking for things, supplies and things like that. So to me, that's being peaceful.
Yeah, for sure. Let's explore that a little further. How else can we see that, Luke?
I mean, David right now is basically an outlaw. He could just take it if he wanted to.
Yeah, and he's got 600 guys. If he wants to swoop down and take 25, 50 sheep, can he do it? Yes! But he didn't. Chris?
Well, he's also peaceful because he protected the guy's flock for no reason at all. It doesn't seem like they received any payment for it.
It doesn't seem like there was any kind of agreement. It doesn't seem like there was any kind of a deal. David just does it. Did David kind of expect that there should be a quid pro quo at the end? You kind of get that impression, maybe. But he just did it. And probably because it was just the right thing to do. Pastor Ertl.
Not to diminish David's uprightness in this situation, but maybe he's also thinking long term as well. If he's truly going to be king of Israel, does he want to go around like a merry band of robbers, taking what he wants from his future subjects? That would not ingratiate very good will in anybody.
Yeah, I think that for sure has to come into play with that. We talked about that last week a little bit in regards to how David respects Saul, and that part of his probably long-term thinking was that he wanted people to respect him. And so it was important for him to respect the king so he could sort of inculcate that idea into the people who were around him. And I think absolutely, and I don't think that necessarily lowers him either. I think it just tells us that he also has the ability to think long-term strategically in a way that makes sense for him to be able to rule the people and rule them well. Just because he was anointed by God didn't mean that God didn't also want him to use his brain and think strategically and wisely. And you seem to see that here in David as he's behaving this way. Excellent. Sue, you also pointed out a different detail, however.
Well, because as soon as the servants came back and told him what Nabal said, that he's going to go and join an army, or not join an army, but start an army up to go after Nabal.
You do get a look at David here to say he has a bit of an impetuous, angry, vengeful side that you don't see all that often, but boy, here it came out, didn't it? He's not going to give me some sheep. Strap on your swords, boys. We are going to go and we are going to wreak some havoc. Wow. Is this what you want to see? Not so much. Jake.
I mean, in one way, though, we do want to see it because he was the one who, the minute he heard Goliath open his mouth, he said, well, that guy's got to die. Like, we're not going to sit for this much longer. And it's that, like, decisiveness in David that's all through his history. He doesn't sit there, like, going, what should I do? What should I do? He's either like, we're running right now, get our stuff, we're getting out of the city. But now he's like, all right, I did it the nice way. But now that I know you don't want to do it the nice way, I'm not going to sit here and fret, oh, what should I do next? Should I try to talk to him again? He goes, no, now I'm just going to take my soldiers. So it's like a decisiveness that sometimes plays out of his face.
Yeah, that's a great point. Kevin, to that point? Different point? Okay, let me come back to that then, if you don't mind. Oftentimes, what will happen with people is that their great strength will be their great weakness. And here you see that. One of David's great strengths was decisiveness. He gets to the battlefront with the Goliath, and what does he say? All right, this guy's got to go down. There was no question about it. Boom, off we go. And you've seen that in David in a variety of ways, but here it serves him in a very negative way. He's going to make a decisive decision, and it's not a good one. And so oftentimes when you look at, and this is important to just as you think about yourself, one of your great strengths is probably also one of your greatest weaknesses. One of my great strengths is I'm impetuous. I love to try new stuff. But that means I'm willing to jump in the pool without first checking to see if there's water in there. That's probably not a good thing, right? And so it's a great strength. It's what really helped me as a mission pastor because, let's try that. If that doesn't work, who cares? We'll try something else. And we just kept bouncing around and doing whatever whatever needed to be done and knew it was great. But it's also a terrible weakness for me. And so, and you see it here in David. Kevin, you had your hand up next. I'm sorry. I was looking at Jake, and Jake's looking at me going, why are you looking at me? Kevin.
I wonder if this is a sign of where David is at. We talked last time about how does he provide for these 600 men? They look to him as their leader, and they have now, he's managed to keep his men off of Nabal's stuff.
Yeah, talk about that. Explore that. What do you learn about David from that?
He's like, I gotta feed my men. I can't keep them off this guy's stuff much longer. And he's maybe got some desperation going on that he's either gonna start losing his men, they're gonna stage a coup, or he's gonna end up having to steal from someone, which he doesn't want to do. You know, he's probably feeling like he's out of options. That does not excuse his willingness to go kill Nabal, and all of the men in his household.
I think you're exploring a bunch of interesting thoughts. We don't know for sure what the answers are to all of it, but the fact that David could keep 600 men in check, and these guys a lot of them were kind of people who had stolen away from their own masters. It seems like some of them were on the run themselves. And yet he had the leadership ability to hold them in check and say, we're going to protect this guy, and we're not going to steal from him. Yep, there's a whole lot of lamb chops walking around down there, boys. And no, we're not taking them. And he was able to hold these guys in check so that they lost nothing. That gives you some insights into David's leadership ability. He must have really been something. Was he getting to a point of some degree of, he needed more? Possibly. Pastor Ertl, at this point? Not really? Let me finish this thought out. Or Luke, to this point?
Might be possible connecting to the king thing is that the king, have to enforce his demands and requests at some point. He can't just be bending to the will of everyone else.
And so he maybe was looking at this and saying, I have to take a stand, otherwise my leadership, my ability to be a leader long term might be impacted. I think that could be true. One other thing to throw into play in this whole mix is sheep shearing time is celebration time. Okay? So sheep shearing time, think Thanksgiving. So here's David's men, and it's Thanksgiving. And what do we not have? The turkey. Okay? We might have food, but we don't have the turkey or the roast beef or whatever it is that you do for Thanksgiving. He doesn't have the celebratory stuff, would be my guess. And because with his message he sends, it's sheep shearing time, share something with us so that we too can have a Thanksgiving meal. Make sense? And so this is a little bit different time. It's not just, December 12th. This is December 25th. Or this is whatever Thanksgiving Day is. This is kind of a celebratory time, and his men probably would like to have had the chance to celebrate too. And so that comes into play with this whole thing. Pastor Ertl, different point, or slightly different point, or something.
Luke picked up on it. This could also be David not wanting to put it in the vernacular, look like a punk. That this guy is going to disrespect me when we have done all this. If we just say, okay, well that's okay, we'll try to go somewhere else. Is that going to lessen the amount of respect that others have for me? Like they can just walk all over me. So maybe I have to take a stand, which is pretty much what Luke said. So.
Absolutely. And so that's got to come into play too. Kevin.
Pure speculation, but it's entirely possible he was telling his men, don't take the sheep. We'll treat him right. He'll help us out. We don't know.
Yeah, you don't know.
Maybe that was part of trying to get his men to do it the right way. Mm-hmm. Let's treat him well and hope that he will respond in kind. And he's like, shoot, that didn't work.
Yeah, so let's try a different strategy. Yeah, finally, we don't know for sure. What we do know is what is happening and what is about to happen. And so let's move to what's about to happen, shall we? Good discussion, guys. Thank you. Let's pick up at verse 18. We're going to look at 18 through 31. Abigail lost no time. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 seahs of roasted grain, which is a bunch, and 100 cakes of raisins and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them on donkeys. This also gives you some insight into at least Nabal's family. Was Abigail in charge of this? It could be, so it could be giving you insight into Abigail. But this is a lot of stuff. And to have all this stuff laid up already would tell you that this guy was a planner. And he had stuff stored up. And he was careful. And all those sorts of things. Make sense? Make sense? So just to see that again, I think is valuable. Then she told her servants, go on ahead, I'll follow you. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. How she pulled this off? Good question. As she came riding her donkey into a mountain ravine, there were David and his men descending toward her, and she met them. David had just said, it's all been useless. All my watching over this fellow's property in the deserts, that nothing of his was missing. He has paid me back evil for good. May God deal with David. There's actually a text note here. The text note, the original Hebrew literally says, may God deal with David's enemies, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to him. It seems as if the Masoretic scribes were uncomfortable with that, so they switched it to may God deal with David, be it ever so severely. But David actually puts the curse on his enemies. And he's not taking the responsibility so much on himself as shoving it off on others. It's kind of an interesting, odd expression. When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "My lord, let the blame be on me alone. Please let your servant speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. May my lord pay no attention to that wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name. His name is Fool, and folly goes with him," which would seem to indicate that mom and dad really did name their kid Fool. Wow. Just why? Who knows? That's what we've got. "But as for me, your servant, I did not see the men my master sent. Now, since the Lord has kept you, my master, from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, as surely as the Lord lives and as you live, may your enemies and all who intend to harm my master be like Nabal. And let this gift, which your servant has brought to my master, be given to the men who follow you. Please forgive your servant's offense, for the Lord will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my master, because he fights the Lord's battles. Let no wrongdoing be found in you as long as you live. Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, the life of my master will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. But the lives of your enemies you will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. When the Lord has done for my master every good thing he promised concerning him and has appointed him leader over Israel, my master will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or of having avenged himself. And when the Lord has brought my master success, remember your servant." Let's stop there and go to your study guide. We can learn a whole lot about Abigail from this section. Talk to me. What are some of the things you learn about Abigail? For now, don't consider her speech. Consider the other stuff. We'll consider her speech in the next question. But what are some things you learn about Abigail from this account? Jake, get us started.
Despite her shortcomings, she obviously loves her husband, because otherwise she could have just let him get his stuff taken and get destroyed.
Yeah, there seems to be a care, a concern, a love even for her husband, in that she's willing to protect him. That's a great thought. I think I saw Megan, then Pastor, and then Chris.
She seems to be respected by the servants because they all just willingly help her. There's no way she could load all that stuff
Yeah.
onto the donkeys. So because she's kind and caring, the servants in turn help her.
If Nabal is yin, Abigail seems to be yang, that she seems to be caring and respectful, and the servants seem to have a great trust for her. So much so that they're willing to say, "You know how our master is, nobody can even talk to him," and they seem to be very comfortable saying that to her, the master's wife, which is pretty interesting. That tells you the degree of trust that's there between her and the servants. Pastor E. Boy, is she bold and decisive, huh?
This is not a small deal for her essentially to go behind her husband's back and try to right his wrongs for him. You know, in another circumstance that might earn her quite a undesirable consequence. But nonetheless, she does it. She doesn't sit there saying, "Oh, golly gee, what should I do?" It's, "Okay, no, we're going to go set this right. Let's go."
So like David, she has a decisiveness to her. Wow, boom, she acts like right now, and acts in a way that it's putting her life on the line in a lot of ways, because she doesn't know how David's going to react, and how in the world is her husband going to react when he finds out that she has done this. Wow. Chris.
Well, and it seems like she's, just to build off that point, she's putting herself underneath her household, because servants came and said, "He's going to kill all the males in the household." So it doesn't seem that she's going to be killed, but she's putting everyone else before herself and saying, "I want to protect everyone. Yeah, my husband making the wrong choice here, but I love my household and I care for my household. Let's protect them."
Yeah, for sure. Now, how much she knew about what David had said, we're not sure, because David, we were told he had just said this to his servants. So, but if somehow it came back, had David said that to the servants already, and the servants perhaps reported that to Abigail. That's at least a possibility. We don't know for sure. But she recognizes there is a threat. The servants recognized there was a threat. How exactly they recognized it, we're not sure. But if that had come back, Chris, that's a great point, that she is putting her whole household at a higher level. Kevin?
I don't know if this plays into it or not. You can tell me if this is too far left field, but wasn't like the culture, I mean, even today, like back then, the Middle Eastern culture of hospitality, I mean, I realize that David and his men were not the normal travelers that you would show hospitality to, but with it being celebration time and their fellow countrymen, and I know you talked about the strategic stuff with King Saul and everything else, but she seems to be honoring that part of their culture maybe too. Maybe that's a stretch.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. I hadn't thought of it, and I honestly did not explore that idea or see anybody explore it in the reading I did. But I'd be okay with that. Yeah, the Middle Eastern culture is far more... if somebody shows up at your door, you're just expected, you're going to feed them. That's just the way it is. And if a traveler comes through, you need to figure out a way to house them. And that was a part of the culture back then for sure, not as much today, but back then for sure. So yeah, I could see that as being, that Nabal just said nuts to that. I'm not even going to follow cultural norms, but Abigail was willing to. Yeah, I could buy that. Take a look at her speech. What are some things you learned from her speech? She's willing to take the blame. How much of the blame was really hers? Like none of it. And
Later goes on to say that she didn't know that the men were there.
yeah, she didn't even know they were there. And yet, she's still willing to take the blame. Wow. That's a pretty remarkable thing. Good. What else, Mike?
That she recognizes who David is and the blessing that he has received from the Lord, and that she wants to protect him from having this thought of bloodshed on his mind for vengeance.
Yeah, you pulled out a couple of really valuable thoughts. First of all, she has a clear understanding of what's going on. That Saul's dynasty is coming to an end and David's dynasty is coming. How did she know that? I don't know. And the scripture just doesn't give us any indication. The anointing of David took place in a very quiet ceremony with just his brothers. However, there were a bunch of brothers. Is it possible that this word just kind of started to spread? Did it become sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Did it come sort of an expectation in the Israelite community because of David's strong leadership in the army stuff? Starting, of course, with the David and Goliath event. Saul has killed his thousands, but David his 10,000s, and then David taking over as a captain in the army and having success wherever he went. Did people just start to go, this David, I bet you it's this David. Was that it? Was it a combination? Somehow there seems to be an expectation that David is going to be the new leader. Pastor E.
She's willing to call a spade a spade. She's very honest, and even, again, if that would run her the risk of not desirable things for her husband, verse 25, pay no attention, my lord, to that wicked man Nabal. He's just like his neighbor, a fool. And his folly was with him. It's like, wow, okay. So she's willing to call it like it is.
Yeah, pretty crazy, huh? It just kind of is. That she'd be willing to say that and willing to recognize that. Even though there does seem to be a care, love, I don't remember who said it, but there seems to be a care, love for him at the same time. Chris?
All of her actions are driven by her faith. So she has a really strong faith, and that's what's driving her to put herself on the line for her household.
Chris points out that it's her faith that's driving her. Why did you say that, Chris? What are the things that you picked out that led you to say that?
She's constantly referencing Lord, capital L-O-R-D, instead of just saying, yeah, you're going to be a mighty person,
Yeah, so she's constantly referencing the Lord, the God of free and faithful love, the God of grace and mercy. She goes back to him over and over and over again, for sure. Did you notice the one little reference in verse... She recognizes, verse 31, that what if David had come down and released bloodshed, that it would have been unjust. She does call him out on that, in a sense, but in a gentle way. It just says, you'll be released from this. That won't be on your conscience anymore. And so she's kind of holding up the laws of Mir to David, but in this really gentle, humble kind of a way that's really, really cool and does well. Did you notice verse 29? But the lives of your enemies he'll hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. I did not think to check the Hebrew, but does that remind you of anything? Yes, it does. It reminds you of David and Goliath, doesn't it? Like I said, I didn't check the Hebrew. Adam, why don't you do a quick Hebrew thing and check the Hebrew there and see if it's the same. But you'd think there's at least an echo going on here of, you're a hero, and you got your heroic standing primarily because you used a sling and you knocked down a giant. And now this is the way God's going to deal with your enemies. He's going to make sure those enemies keep getting slung away. Wow, what a cool little echo. Adam, when you figure it out, let me know. Okay? Cool. Or if anybody else wants to study, take the Hebrew. Jake or Pastor E or Risa, you don't do Hebrew, do you? It's cool. You ought to take it up. Let's pick up at verse 32, shall we? Was there anything else that we didn't bring out on those? Kevin?
If I missed someone else saying this, I apologize, but I thought it was interesting that David addressed Nabal. He directed his servants to say, or his men rather, to say to Nabal, help out your servants and David. She's flipped that. And
Ooh, nice catch.
She says she is his servant.
Nice catch. I hadn't thought about that.
There's a flipping of the humility there to call out the kindness from the other person.
Good thought. I had not thought about that, but yeah, that was a great strategic move on her part too, huh? Yeah, for sure. She seems like a very wise lady, that's for sure. Let's pick up verses 32 through 44. David said to Abigail, praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands. Otherwise, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, who has kept me from harming you, if you had not come quickly to meet me, not one male belonging to Nabal would have been left alive by daybreak. Then David accepted from her hand what she had brought him and said, go home in peace. I've heard your words and granted your requests. When Abigail went to Nabal, he was in the house holding a banquet like that of a king. He was in high spirits and very drunk. So she told him nothing until daybreak. Then in the morning, when Nabal was sober, his wife told him all these things, and his heart failed him, and he became like a stone. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, praise to the Lord who has upheld my cause against Nabal for treating me with contempt. He has kept his servant from doing wrong, and has brought Nabal's wrongdoing down on his own head. Then David sent word to Abigail, asking her to become his wife. His servants went to Carmel and said to Abigail, David has sent us to you to take you to become his wife. She bowed down with her face to the ground and said, here is your maidservant, ready to serve you and wash the feet of your master's servants. Abigail quickly got on a donkey and attended by her 5 maids, which, by the way, is a reminder, this is a very wealthy lady. Okay? This is a very wealthy lady. David had also married Ahinoam of Jezreel, and they both were his wives. But Saul had given his daughter Michal, David's wife, to Paltiel, son of Laish, who is from Galim. So this is wife number 3 for David. Wife number 1 has been taken away from him. That was Saul's daughter Michal. How exactly he got connected with Ahinoam, we just don't know. But now also Abigail is in the mix. Are you happy, Megan?
No, I just didn't know that Michael got taken away
Yeah, well, David had to flee. Remember, David had to flee from Saul, and Michal was part of the conspiracy of it because she laid the idol thing in her bed so it looked like David, and then David was able to get away. And so Saul then took her and gave her to somebody else. Yeah. But are you happy to see that David is more than one wife? Say no. Good. Good answer. Yep. Yeah, this is not a good thing. And it does give us insights. One of the things that God had forbade kings to do is to have multiple wives. And that David is doing this does give us a little hint to say, there's going to be some other things coming. Yes, he's a hero of faith. Yes, he does a lot of things incredibly well. But there are some areas where he's got some weaknesses, and this is one of them. This is one of them. Let's go to your study guide. Brainstorm. If David had followed up his plan to go in and wreak havoc on Nabal's house, what consequences could there have been for David? Adam? Sling?
What you were talking about, yeah, it's the same 3 words, but the verb
It's the same 3 words for to hurl a sling? Wow, for sure then I think you've got to hear an echo of the David and Goliath account. You just have to. That's so cool. I never saw that before. That's so cool. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, it's just fun. That's fun. Yeah, Old Testament prophets get geeky on stuff like that, so. Sue. So I'd asked Adam to look up the Hebrew when Abigail said he's going to hurl your enemies away like a sling. I asked if that was the same Hebrew word for when David killed Goliath with a sling. And it is. And it's the same word for hurled. And so you hear in Abigail's words to David, he's going to hurl away your enemies like a sling. You hear an echo of what happened in the David and Goliath account. At least I think that's what Abigail's doing there, because there's no reason to use those words otherwise. There just isn't. God will destroy your enemies. God will drive your enemies away. God will make your enemies serve you, whatever. I mean, there's all kinds of ways she could have said it. The fact that she uses this Hebrew of the sling and hurl them away, I think there's for sure an echo thing going on, which is really cool. It has nothing to do with the next question. Adam was just coming in and answering. Yep. It has nothing to do with the next question. So, yep, thank you for letting me make that more clear. All right, back to this. If David had followed through and had gone down and had wiped out Nabal's household, what are the consequences that could have happened? Let's speculate a little bit. Megan, I think your hand was up.
Nope, but I can say something.
Go ahead.
Maybe God would have come to him and reprimanded him, or he would have had consequences for that. I mean, we haven't seen that necessarily yet with David, but that could have happened.
So there very well could have been consequences brought by God himself. For sure. God does that later with David with some of his stuff. I think I saw Luke and then Chris and then Mike.
Right. So it could be that other people won't hear that they were suspected, but he'll hear that he came down this wealthy person and killed his household and took his stuff, and they won't want to help anything to do with him.
Excellent thoughts. Chris?
He's already not, good standing with all the people, so to turn around and do this, it's probably going to be even more people that want to have Saul captured and kill him.
Excellent. So it could have pushed more people towards Saul's direction. Mike, were you up next?
I think so. There could have been growth from malice inside of David's heart because, like you said, with the wives, if I have 2 wives, but stop me have a third. If I have a third, why don't I have a fourth? And you have like 120 like Saul. Same. Who is it? Same one? Saul.
Solomon is one who ends up having hundreds and which is a real huge problem. Of course, Solomon is David's son. Yeah, so if he acts impetuously, comes down and kills off the people and then does take Abigail and his wife anyway, which we don't know if he would have, because there maybe wouldn't have been this interchange. We're just not sure. But if he had overrode Abigail, my guess is that she's probably not going to be as interested in becoming his wife, right? So he may have lost out on Abigail and built up ill will and may have encouraged him to act likewise in future times. Kevin has an incredulous look on his face. Okay? Sue.
I know what Megan was saying, that, you know, he said that he would have got, if there was one male alive by the end of the day, that God should put a curse on him.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then the curse could be put on him. I mean, the curse still could have been put on him because there were more, all the men were still alive, but yet she avoided that.
Yeah, so if, David is asking God to curse him if he leaves any males alive. And then what if he doesn't get them all? Is there going to be a curse on it? I mean, it's just, the speculation part of it can get a little wacky. Is that a hand up, Pastor E?
Never mind. My mind just went blank.
Okay.
Sorry.
No worries. Let's, Juliana.
I mean, later on, we see David obviously have a very difficult time with sin, like his guilt in the Psalms when he goes back to that. So, if he did go through this, I think that would have just been another thing that obviously later on, in that moment, he probably wouldn't realize, but later on, when he has such a heavy weight, as he, has that revelation and realizes he is not a
I think that's a great point. We are told later on that David has a guilty conscience about the whole Bathsheba affair. Holy cow. This would have probably weighed on him big time. And even if nothing else goes bad, just the knowledge of what he had done would have probably weighed on him in ways that would have really, really, really torn him up and impacted his ability to lead. Cool.
As it happened, David is reminded that he can leave things in the Lord's hands, because his intention was to take this whole matter into his own hands and take vengeance for himself. So, it turns out here's yet another instance where if I don't go about evil, the Lord's going to take care of things anyway. So that's, in future dealings, that's one more thing to remind him of what God had done. And on the flip side, had he gone through with his plan, you have to imagine that it would only become easier and easier and easier to take things into your own hands and do something like he had planned on doing.
Yeah, for sure. And this comes into play with the whole discussion of where this section falls. This section is recorded between chapters 24 and 26. Abishai, let's assume that this goes in chronological order. In this instance, God brings judgment on Nabal pretty quickly. And so you get a chance to look at what God's thought of this whole thing was. He does bring judgment on Nabal quickly. Nabal's heart dies within him, but then 10 days later he's struck dead. We're not exactly sure what the interplay is. Did he have like a stroke and then he dies? Does he go kind of catatonic and then his heart literally fails? Finally, we don't know, but it's a pretty quick resolution on this. If that's the case, did that help David in chapter 26? When he's got the chance to pin Saul to the ground, when they sneak into the camp at night and the water jug and the spear are right there? Did this event kind of help protect him from doing that? Saying, no, I saw God take care of this. I don't have to do this. God will take care of it. It's at least a possibility if it's not a probability. It's at least a possibility if it's not a probability. So that may help us to understand why this gets recorded where it does. Let's bounce down into the God's Word in our lives thing. I do want to, let's look at number 7, and then I want to look down in the God's Word in our lives real quick. I want to talk about number 7 just real fast. Can you imagine Abigail's whirlwind of emotions going on at this point? Her husband has just died. Now, her husband doesn't sound like he was the peachiest guy in the world to live with. But he had made her a very wealthy woman. And there does seem to be some kind of a care affection thing going on there. And now 10 days later, the guy who's supposed to be the future king is asking her to marry him. And it kind of sounds like it's not really a request. It's kind of almost more of a demand or command. She seems to react to it very well, and yet it's not even 2 weeks, or you get the impression it's like immediately after the death of her husband. And now she's going to get married to a guy who is on the run. Whew. Abigail must have been quite a lady. I think that's as much as we can say at this point, and she doesn't get a lot of ink after this, but you get the impression she was quite a lady. Let's look at verses 2, or questions 2, just question 2 down in the bottom. What do we learn about what it means to love our neighbor? What do we learn about what it means not to love our neighbor, or to not love our neighbor? I'm not sure the English-wise the best way to put it. Talk to me either side. What do you learn about what it means to love your neighbor as yourself? What does it not mean? Chris, get us started.
Doesn't mean to seek revenge.
So seeking revenge will never be love for my neighbor. Excellent. Megan.
You shouldn't love your neighbor with the expectation that they will do the same back to you.
Yeah, don't be loving your neighbor with the expectation that they'll love you back. They may, but God tells us to love our neighbor as ourselves. I think I saw Jake and then Pastor E.
Loving your neighbor means having the confidence and strength to not allow your neighbor to harm themselves, like Abigail did with David. Like being strong and confident enough to be like, hey, you're going to end up really poorly if you do that. Like, let me help you so you don't fall on this.
Yeah, excellent thought. Abigail reached out to help protect David from himself. And so loving your neighbor can mean reaching out to somebody if you know the situation, and if you have the ability to, and if you can do it with humility to say, don't do this. This will only hurt yourself. Pastor E.
Loving your neighbor means thinking outside of yourself and what impact your choices are going to have, not just on you, but on others. For example, Nabal, he goes ahead and gives David the cold shoulder, probably not giving a second thought to, is this going to have ramifications? Well, if David would have had his way, his entire household would have been destroyed. On the flip side of that, you have Nabal. What does she do? You have Abigail, rather. What does she do? She thinks about how this is going to affect the entire household, and she takes action for the benefit of not only her household, but also for David.
Yeah, you kind of get the impression that Nabal is thinking about him, and him, whereas Abigail seems to be thinking about the whole household. And so loving my neighbor as myself is thinking not just about me, but thinking about bigger, thinking about others, and thinking about how things impact others, even if it's not necessarily what I would prefer. Nice thoughts. All right, I think we'll have to wrap up there. I am pretty positive that next week is Saul and the Witch of Endor. I did not look ahead again, so I was wrong last week. I thought Saul and the Witch of Endor was coming this week, but I'm pretty sure it might be coming next week. I don't know. I shouldn't even make that promise because I'm just not sure. Maybe it's David amongst the Philistines. I don't know. We'll find out. Come back next week. Be surprised. All right? If you've already worshiped the Lord, go enjoy in peace. If you have not yet worshiped, come and worship the Lord. If you can bring your Bibles back to the front and put them into the bottom of the thing here, that would be much appreciated.
Yeah, you too. Good luck.
on his face?
Well, let's start class.